Hey there folks, Mr. G here with another educational video. This time we're going to be talking about the immune system. Remember, you put your name up at the top here, the block, the date, as well as our page number. Now there's a lot of vocabulary in this lesson, as you'll see from the top here, so make sure that you're paying attention and make sure that you've completed all of the notes. Now the immune system is the system in the body that defends itself against pathogens and infections, basically all the things that make us sick. Pathogens are microbes that cause disease. We already talked about microbes. Those are the things we can only see with a microscope. So they're itty-bitty pieces of material, so bacteria or viruses that can cause diseases or other sorts of problems with our body. And we are constantly exposed to pathogens. So we are exposed to them all the time. They're all around us and even inside of us. And a small cut that can get a bacterial infection can kill you if it wasn't for our immune system's protection. And our immune system actually has three different lines of defense, or three different ways that it protects us from pathogens: external and internal barricades, innate immune response, and then adaptive immune response. The difference here between the two immune responses: innate, this is something that we already have. So everyone is born with this, whereas our adaptive immune response builds over time. So let's look at our first line of defense: external and internal barricades. So the biggest one that we have is our skin. It's a physical barrier that stops pathogens from entering our body. It covers us for the most part, so that means that pathogens can't get in because it has to pass through our skin. Sweat and other sorts of body acids kill some pathogens, like the things in your stomach, for instance. Hair and other hair-like structures called cilia in the nose and throat stop pathogens from entering when we breathe. So whether you breathe through your mouth or through your nose, there's little hairs and hair-like structures that can capture pathogens before they get into the body. In addition, along with those hairs, we have some mucus in our nose and our throat to trap pathogens. When we cough, sneeze, and swallow, the mucus and pathogens are all removed. So when you sneeze because some dust or any other sort of particles are in your nose, that's our body getting rid of those particles along with any other pathogens it might have absorbed. Stomach acid in our stomach kills many pathogens that we eat. We can also vomit up if you've ever eaten bad food. That usually probably has some sort of bacteria that has affected the food. When it gets into our body detects that and it vomits it back out of our body so that we don't get sick. Eyelashes and tears also prevent pathogens from entering our eyes. So you'll notice all of these barriers, these don't really discriminate against pathogens or any other sort of foreign objects. They're really just here to prevent stuff from entering the body that shouldn't be there, or kill things once they get inside. So that was our first line of defense. Our second line of defense is our innate immune response. Now we're getting into things that specifically target pathogens. And the biggest thing that we have in our fight against pathogens are called phagocytes, which is a type of white blood cell. And white blood cells are all the types of blood cells that usually help with our immune system. And a phagocyte surrounds and eats pathogens. And they attack all microbes that don't belong to the body. So they don't discriminate. Anything that they think shouldn't be there, they attack. And if you've ever seen pus around a wound or anything else, that's made from a certain type of phagocytes that self-destruct after they devour a pathogen. So like we see in this picture here, we've got our pathogen, we've got our phagocyte, it comes over here, it eats it, and then sometimes this pus is made up of the pathogen after devouring the pathogen will self-destruct and destroy the pathogen along with it. Now, if you've ever gotten a cut or any other sort of injury, you might have noticed some inflammation, which is something that happens in damaged or infected areas that aids healing. Inflammation here just means that it turns red and it gets hot. So like if you ever had a cut that turns really red or gets sort of tender when you touch it, that's inflammation. And this is caused by a chemical signal called histamine molecules that's sent out from these damaged or infected areas. And in our picture here, we've got a cut. So this cut is infected with some bacteria. And these little red dots here are histamine molecules. And they send out signals to the body to tell them that this area is injured. And this signal increases blood flow. That's why it gets really tender, really hot, and swollen, because there's all this extra blood that's coming there. And that's because of these histamine molecules. But this is good for healing because more blood means more white blood cells. These phagocytes that help kill bacteria, we get more of them into this area and they can kill off all the bacteria that's here. And that's what we see in our picture. We've got our white blood cells coming from our blood vessel because now there's more blood flow. Now, some of you might have allergies. And if you have an allergy, it's your body thinking that certain molecules like pollens or nuts are pathogens. So your immune system reacts to those molecules. Antihistamine medication help reduce the inflammation because these histamine molecules create that inflammation, send out that chemical signal, cause all the swelling and the pain and the redness. So antihistamine reduce that inflammation and prevent people from having allergic reactions by stopping that chemical signal. And this can be really important because that inflammation, especially if it's happening in your throat, can cause people to suffocate. And that's why things like nut allergies can be really severe because those histamine molecules go into overdrive and they can swell up all sorts of areas where it can be life-threatening. This response is relatively fast. If you've gotten a cut, it gets pretty red and inflamed quite quickly. And everyone's born with their innate immune response. We mentioned that at the start briefly. Your innate just means that you're born with it or you already have it. Now, our third line of defense is a little bit different. This is our acquired immune response. And this is our third line of defense because this only comes into play if our first and second line of defense fails. So they're in order. So when the infection gets too great for our innate immune response, the adaptive immune response kicks in. And these adaptive responses don't target everything. They target only one specific pathogen at a time. And this takes a long time for the body to learn. How to make the cells they need to target these specific pathogens. Because we're not born with it, our body has to learn how to fight certain diseases. There's two levels for this, humoral and cellular. Humoral just means within our body fluids. Now the way that this works is that any type of pathogen is covered in proteins called antigens. And this is what the pathogen uses to attach to our cells and affect those cells. So in our picture down here, we've got this red blob, that's our pathogen, and each of these little shapes on the outside represents an antigen. So an antigen is this little sort of spike or protrusion. They're proteins that they use to attach to our cells. Antibodies are Y-shaped molecules created by a certain type of cell called a B cell. So this is another type of white blood cell, just like our phagocytes, and they bind to our antigens. So we see in our picture here, we've got this green antibody, and it binds to a specific antigen. So these B cells fight the pathogen by making antibodies that attach to the antigen outside of our pathogen. So these antibodies line up and they attach here. And only one type of antibody matches and can attach to our type of antigen. It's like a lock and a key, right? You can have many different types of locks, many different types of keys, but only the ones that match are going to work. So we can see in our picture here, we've got our B cell covered in these antibodies, and then our pathogen that's attached here. You can also have antibodies that are separate, so they're both on the B cell as well as separate from our B cell. Now, when a B cell finds a pathogen like it does here, that it recognizes, that matches with one of its antigens or antibodies, it copies itself and sends out millions of these specific antibodies. So they make copies of the cells themselves, as well as sending out a bunch of these little antibodies separate from the cells to fight the pathogen. Now, these antibodies can't kill the pathogen, right? They attach to the outside, but they can work in two different ways to help fight the pathogen. First, they can slow them down by binding them together into large clumps. So if you've got these Y-shaped molecules attached to all of your pathogens here, you'll notice because it's got this Y shape, there's multiple places where the antibody can attach, so you can end up binding these molecules together into these clumps, which make it less likely that they're going to be able to pass throughout your body. They're more likely to get stuck on other sorts of things or form large clumps that don't allow them to move in the way that they need to infect your cells. These antibodies can also neutralize pathogens by covering all the surface so they can't attach to our body cells. Remember, the reason why they have these antigens is so that they can attach to our cells. If they're covered in antibodies on all the places where they would attach, they can't attach to our cells and affect us. Once the pathogens have been neutralized or slowed down, our phagocytes, so that's our second line of defense, can come in and kill the pathogen. Because these antibodies don't kill them, they just slow them down or neutralize them. Now, the second type of cell in our third line of defense, our cellular third line of defense, dealing with our cells, is when pathogens such as virus get inside of our cells. Once they do, they are safe from phagocytes, they're safe from antibodies because they're inside of our cell. Once this happens, cells that have been infected will protrude small pieces of viral protein on the outside of their cell membrane. So if this green blob is our infected body cell, these pink dots are the little flags that they put out to signal that it's infected. This is like a flag saying that the cell is infected And this is where T cells, which is another different type of white blood cell, so we've got our phagocytes, we've got our B cells, and now our T cells, they can recognize and bind to specific viral protein flags. So they can see all of these flags on the outside of our cell, and they can bind to it. And once it does recognize the flag of an infected body cell, it can kill the cell, killing the infection along with it. Once the adaptive immune response learns how to fight a particular pathogen, once they've learned about the sort of antigens on the outside of their pathogen or the way that it works, it makes memory B and T cells. So these are sort of like the storage memory of different types of diseases your body has encountered, so that in the future it will recognize the pathogen and it can fight and kill it before it gets sick. So that your third line of defense, your B cells as well as your T cells, can do a better job of stopping the infection before it spreads too far, by neutralizing it using our antibodies, or killing infected cells with our T cells right away by recognizing these viral protein flags. Once you get to that point that you have enough memory B and T cells for a specific pathogen, you are now immune to the disease. Your body will kill it before it causes any problems. Now, when you are born, you have a very weak adaptive immune system because your body hasn't learned how to fight any pathogens yet. And this makes sense. It takes time to build up these memory cells to encounter different diseases, and this is why at an early age, vaccines can be really important. And we'll learn a little bit about vaccines in the next couple lessons, but these vaccines can help us sort of develop our adaptive immune response early on. That's the end of our video here. Thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure you check Teams for all the other videos, assignments, and homework, and I will see you all in the next video.